To understand the representation of female characters in Star Wars, we must understand its history and context. Back in 1975, Laura Mulvey coined the term male gaze, perhaps an often misunderstood term as it reached popular culture. The concept, which draws on theorists such as Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, is a psychoanalysis which describes the way in which women are portrayed through the lens that reflects a male perspective. This happens because historically, the media has been predominantly created by men, leading to a portrayal that caters to a male audience. The male gaze consists of two key elements. A. How cinema often portrays women to be looked at as objects, and B. The tendency for audiences to identify with a male protagonist. A and B highlight a dynamic in how women are represented in film, especially when it comes to the conventions of storytelling. This tension corresponds to two types of gazes. One gaze is that of the spectator enjoying the female form for pleasure, tapping into male fantasies. The other comes from a spectator who sees a reflection of himself in a realistic setting, feeling a sense of control over the women in the story. Mulvey points out that cinema often frames stories and perspectives from a masculine point of view, and that when we think about cinema, we can see it through three unique perspectives. The camera recording events. Second, we have the audience viewing the final product. And third, the relationship between the characters as they interact with one another on screen. Mulvey argues that camera technology and movement blur screen space, allowing the male protagonist to dominate the stage of spatial illusion, shaping the look and action. As a result, the structure encourages viewers to see women from that point of view, his viewpoint. For instance, in many classic narratives of film, we have many shots where the development of the storyline freezes and draws attention to their physical form, thus sharing their viewpoint to the audience. This is where the audience comes in. The camera simultaneously narrows down the way the audience can see the viewpoint, so when fixations on erotic images appear on screen without any filters, the audience's gaze is repressed, making it hard for the viewer to step back and gain any different perspective on what they are witnessing. It is how the camera promotes a convincing space while denying its own presence and the audience's perspectives. And finally, this leads us to the characters within the narrative. This is how the characters interact with each other in the story. Mulvey argues that traditionally, the woman on screen functions as an erotic object for both the characters in the story and the audience, creating a tension between their perspectives on either side of the screen. So, how does this apply to Star Wars? The obvious example is Leia's infamous bikini outfit in Return of the Jedi. This example is what Mulvey may refer to as fetishistic scopophilia, associated to Freudian theory. However, I believe it to be more complicated than that. The widespread recognition of the male gaze in popular culture has led to a common misconception that women must be sexualized in order to be objectified. This interpretation is not completely accurate. Some, such as Elizabeth Van Zunen and Jean Kilbourne, argue and identify that men and women's bodies are represented differently when it comes to a sensual or intimate context. In Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin wakes up from his dream, we can see him topless. However, this does not diminish his autonomy. When Anakin wakes up, he regains control, indicating that he feels secure in his masculine body. Whether that be your interpretation or not, what I'm trying to say here is that the context enables a broader understanding of implications, and that when males are depicted with less clothing, it is often represented in a way to be admired, emphasizing the strength and power of the physical form. Another example, in The Acolyte, Chimere is fully nude with Osha's presence fixated on him. However, the connotations associated imply that Chimere is in control by the way that even when in a state of vulnerability, being fully nude, he has no reason to fear signified by the body language. He is still in the position of power. Let's take an example of the male gaze in action. Take George Lucas's depiction of Padme, for example. She is seen as a queen, senator, political leader, or even hero. She tends not to be overtly sexualized. However, it may be argued that she may be made into a visual spectacle through extravagant clothing. Anakin's focus on her beauty reflects the traditional patriarchal portrayal of women as passive, objectifying them to their body rather than acknowledging their autonomy. Even in death, she is depicted merely as a body, highlighted in a funeral scene. By Revenge of the Sith, Anakin's obsessiveness sadness over Padme drives him towards the dark side for the purpose of the plot. This obsession diminishes her role in the film as politician and heroine, reducing her to an object of his need. This portrayal sidelines Padme, implying that the woman's role as secondary to the narrative and establishing male characters' control over the narrative and reinforcing ideals about women's worth tied to their appearance. This may be considered what Mulvey associates or describes as sadistic voyeurism. I find it interesting that Leia Organa, despite the infamous bikini outfits, can be seen as a less problematic character than Padme, particularly given that the prequels were made over a decade after the original trilogies. Leia can certainly be considered as a feminist icon. She embodies self-determination, rejecting control from men and standing firm in her belief. However, identification of Leia as a strong female lead does not resolve the issue of female representation. The male gaze was still in effect. She boldly confronts figures like Tarkin and Vader, prioritizing her mission for peace and justice, yet she remained isolated in a male-dominated narrative, love interest to Han Solo, and sidelined to sister in Luke Skywalker's journey. On the other hand, Padme Amidala's journey shifts from active to passive. In the context of the live-action movies, she sacrifices her values for a man who values her appearance over her intellect and spirit, sacrificing her career and risking her life. I think it is important to note that despite initial missteps, the Clone Wars animated series demonstrates efforts to address these issues in its later seasons, emphasizing her strength as a leader and politician, as well as representing Anakin to be a better role model. While the two characters are initially presented as strong female leads with significant potential, they become secondary to the narrative, serving primarily to advance the story arcs of the male counterparts. Some, such as Bell Hooks, critique Mulvey's male gaze theory, arguing that most feminist film critics often claim to represent all women, while primarily reflecting on the experiences of white Western women, neglecting viewpoints of black women and other marginalised groups. Whilst I acknowledge the importance of Mulvey's male gaze theory, I also believe that we have our own unique perspectives shaped by our historical and cultural context. When referring to the male gaze, I think it is important to recognise it as a construct based on a demographics prevailing ideologies at the particular period of time. And I think it is possible that women can also share these ideologies, that of the male gaze. Although I would say there is still progress to be made, I am hopeful that perspectives have evolved, and some members of that demographic had or even now advocate for greater inclusivity. Some could argue that Star Wars has shifted from featuring passive female figures to strong heroines after the years, featuring more prominent female leads and providing more diversity. However, the Bechdel test prompts further reflections on these issues of representation. The Bechdel test, named after the cartoonist Alison Bechdel, originated from her comic strip The Rule, published in 1985, is a way to measure women's representation using 3 criteria. 1. It has to have at least 2 women in it, who 2. talk to each other, about 3. something besides a man. At this current time, there have been 12 Star Wars films produced for the canonical context, 6 of which fail the Bechdel test, according to Bechdel.com. Whilst the other 6 pass, they offer minimal interaction between women, including the recent Disney trilogy with Rey and a standalone film with Jyn Erso. Historically, even the extras are often dominated by men. Droids and aliens are often gendered as male. Padme has the most contact with other women, yet some may argue her arc is the least developed female lead of the 3 trilogies. The latest iterations of Star Wars presents a broader spectrum of content. One of the most highly regarded series, The Mandalorian, has achieved considerable popularity, spanning 3 seasons from 2019 to 2023. Let us take a moment to examine The Mandalorian in greater detail and whether each season passes the Bechdel test. Season 1 introduces some female characters, but most episodes feature only one, failing the Bechdel test. Only 3 episodes include 2 or more females. However, one pair, Peli Motto and Fennec Shan, don't interact. The other 2 episodes feature Cara Dune and Omira, and Cara Dune and the Armourer, where interactions consist of single responses. While their exchanges may formally meet the criteria, they ultimately lack the necessary depth. Therefore, I would personally give the season a fail. Season 2 introduces two major female characters, Ahsoka Tano and Bo-Katan, while bringing back familiar ones. A new unnamed female character is also introduced, however some may argue her role is insignificant to the overall narrative. Despite the presence of these characters, many episodes still don't offer much interaction between each other. The longest dialogue between two women is between Ahsoka and Morgan Elsbeth, primarily referencing Grand Admiral Thrawn, and therefore failing the Bechdel test.
Where is your master? Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?
A brief mention of Elsbeth's rule hints at a larger narrative, but quickly shifts back to Thrawn. Whilst there are brief instances of female characters talking to each other, the screen time is mere seconds, and like Season 1, usually responding to a single sentence. So personally, I would say the season also fails. In Season 3 there are notable instances in which the Armourer engages dialogue with Bo-Katan. These discussions contribute significant depth to Bo-Katan's character development, allowing for a more comprehensive exploration of her values and beliefs while also adding to the Armourer's ideologies. This certainly passes the Bechdel test, however these two characters tend to be the only significant females who interact actively throughout the overall narrative. The second most interactive dialogue between two female characters occurs in Chapter 22 between Bo-Katan and the Duchess. However, a significant portion of her dialogue emphasises her role in a domestic setting, and she does not reappear in any subsequent episode. As the Bechdel test gained popularity, it was never meant to be a definitive measure to determine whether a film was feminist, nor was it intended to serve as an assessment of a film's overall quality, but rather a critique. It reveals the overall lack of female relationships and identities, representation of identities within narrative. While I acknowledge that the second season may not fully meet the criteria of the Bechdel test, I imagine the presence of multiple female characters in the concluding scenes of Season 2 means a lot to many viewers, and can undoubtedly be viewed as progression for female representation. Judith Butler argues sex is biological, gender is cultural. Lisbeth Van Zunen argues that gender understanding is shaped by discourse, encompassing various media forms like film, television, news articles, and video games. She argues that these media significantly influence perceptions of femininity and masculinity, often perpetuating stereotypes. Jean Kilbourne, known for her work in advertising, highlights how women are represented in relations to gender. She points out that the media often portrays women as flawless, with unrealistic expectations regarding imperfections, whilst men are not held to the same standards. Kilbourne also notes that women are commonly presented as passive figures in narrative, exemplified by the damsel in distress trope. In advertisements, women are frequently dismembered to emphasise specific body parts, such as from the neck down, implying that their physical appearance is more important than their face or personality. This trend objectifies women, reducing them to their physical attributes. Additionally, she points out that there is an obsession with thinness, along with the demonisation of those who do not meet this ideal. Star Wars has effectively challenged the damsel in distress trope, notably with its portrayal of female protagonists after a decades-long hiatus between films. Rey's rugged look contrasts sharply with Padmé's elegance, emphasising survival over aesthetics. She is depicted scavenging for food rather than luxury, with her practical unisex attire mirroring Jyn Erso's functional clothing choice. This gender-neutral presentation underscores their social status and complements the narrative's serious tone. The sequel era marked a significant shift in female representation, with characters like Rey demonstrating strength while downplaying traditional femininity. Nevertheless, she faced criticism as a Mary Sue archetype for being overtly powerful with insufficient development. Despite efforts to craft her as a feminist icon, some may argue that Rey's perceived lack of vulnerability and growth ultimately led to the audience's disappointment, reducing her to a stereotype meant to challenge male dominance.
Why is the Force connecting us?
Furthermore, the dyad connection portrays her dependency on Kylo, symbolising a regression in female representation rather than empowerment. As a result, some may argue that the trilogy fails to present an inspiring female protagonist, as Rey's character largely hinges on the relationship of a male figure, undermining her independence. The Star Wars universe features a prominent roster of notable male villains. While characters like Vader and Maul are widely recognised, it can be argued that female villains in the Star Wars universe have often been portrayed as obstacles or minor challenges rather than formidable adversaries, suggesting that the narrative don't take female villains as much of a threat compared to male villains. However, there are instances where female villains take the role of the main antagonist. Asajj Ventress, popularised in the animated The Clone Wars series, is represented as Count Dooku's formidable assassin. By the third season, the series no longer marginalises her character to minor consequences, especially after escaping Dooku's betrayal. Not only does she become a great threat to Dooku, however, we are invited to see her struggles with her identity and feelings as she takes the central role in several story arcs and episodes. Unfortunately, I feel her recognition as a formidable antagonist remains largely unacknowledged outside Clone Wars fans, particularly since it has not been represented in live action. Perhaps there is an opportunity to develop characters such as Ventress, or even Aurra Sing, representing their perspectives on the Clone Wars or even Imperial era. Statistically, the rise of female heroes is beginning to be matched by the increase in female villains. However, Kilborn's concern about body size still persists. Most characters remain average or slim. Age still remains a concern, affecting women in Hollywood. Senior villains appear to be demonized. Shows such as The Mandalorian subtly invite older female characters, age over 40 in diverse roles, contrasting industry norms where older women are often overlooked. Despite this, some may argue that the industry pressures remain, with older roles frequently given to younger-looking women or typecasted. Beauty standards shape expectations in media, driven by financial motivations, but increasing diversity is slowly being recognised. Especially with Andor, which gives Marva, an older woman, a clear central role in several scenes throughout his episodes. The dominant ideologies of white patriarchal capitalism shape perceptions of power, often unnoticed, influencing societal aspects like film. In Star Wars, Princess Leia emerges as a strong female figure, but her representation becomes marginalised. Padme Amidala's character becomes increasingly defined by her romantic relationship, failing to showcase her potential. Despite Rey's introduction as a strong lead, the films remain male-dominated. Although Jyn Erso presents a strong, active role, she too remains in a male-centric narrative. Additionally, within the context of the live-action representation, they all lack meaningful female relationships. While there are more female characters, they remain underrepresented, predominantly white and often sidelined. There is no Bo-Katan series because that was given to The Mandalorian. There is no Mon Mothma series because that was reserved for Andor. There is no Fennec Shan series because the star of the show is Boba Fett. Conversely, it may be a strategic approach to gradually develop female characters, increasing audience interest. Nevertheless, the franchise reflects a broader issue in cinema regarding female representation, emphasizing a need for more diverse and complex female characters beyond stereotypes. It is essential to ensure that female fans and characters receive fair treatment and equal support rather than facing stereotypes, marginalization, and left with inadequate marketing. The ongoing challenge is to achieve true equality in representation, moving forward to a future where women can define themselves in their own terms, surrounded by diverse relationships. With the recent series Skeleton Crew targeting a younger audience and featuring a diverse cast and compelling narrative, alongside the upcoming Season 2 of Andor, aimed towards older viewers and subtly addressing similar matters, the Star Wars franchise appears to be setting a positive course for the future, one that values diversity and inclusivity.